Hello again, and we are on 5.3. This is more about farmers, as again we continue with covering the West, expanding the West and Midwest. Of course, farming was a major occupation there, obviously very necessary if you want to eat. And there were all sorts of organizations that were eventually set up to help farmers, to help them deal with the difficulties of farming, whether it's have a bad harvest or transporting your goods to market or really whatever. One of those organizations was called the Grange. Whoops, I did that again. Geez, every single time. One of the organizations was called the Grange, and the Grange is just an organization, as we'll see here. The Grange is just an organization that fought for farmers' rights. And so Oliver Hudley was one of the people who really fought for farmers' rights by helping to found the Grange. Do not believe they are still around any longer. Of course, Farmers Alliance, I think that's pretty clear that that's a group of farmers that are designed to, well, help farmers. I know it's shocking, isn't it? Populism. Now, this one is a little more complicated, and there'll be video on this as well that will talk more about this. But it means something different now than it did back then. A lot of people are describing the current presidency of Donald Trump as a populist presidency, meaning that meaning in current day, that they are trying to reach out to what the average person's fears are and trying to address what the average person, the typical person, their daily worries. Back then in the 1800s, it was more of a movement that sought directly to advance farmers and laborers. Now, one could make the argument, well, farmers and laborers are the normal people, are the regular people. Uh, and maybe you could say that with laborers. Farmers are unfortunately, there's not nearly as many as there were before, but it really looks more towards specific groups, farmers, laborers, whereas today's populism would include everybody, the every so-called average person. Now, what's the average person? Well, that's a completely different story. But make sure to look at the video on populism when after this. Bimetallism. So as you can see, this is gold and silver in this beautiful picture. There used to be a time in the United States where every single dollar that we minted or that we printed had to be backed up by an equal amount of gold. And that meant that you could not print any more money unless you found more gold. Well, as you know, there's a limited amount of gold in the world. One day, someone came up with an idea that said, look, we need to have more money in circulation. So, how about instead of backing money with only gold, let's back it with silver and gold, either one. And so, since there's a lot more silver and gold than just gold, it would make it easier to find the precious metals. And then when you found them, you could then produce more money, and that increases the amount of money that's available in the supply. Um, it did not pass. This was rejected. So bimetallism did not pass. Instead, they remained with the gold standard, which of course is backing dollars solely with gold. This was the case, I believe, up until the 1930s or so, maybe it was late 30s, early 40s, where we now go on a system called the fiat currency system. And let me tell you, if you want to study economics later on in your life, it is a wonderful field to go into. But when someone was to say, well, what do we back our money with nowadays if we don't use gold or silver or any precious metal? And that question is so incredibly complex that you literally could spend years and years just researching that. But it is called a fiat currency, and it is not backed by anything. It is not backed by any tangible material like gold or anything. So we are no longer on the gold standard. William McKinley, 1896 presidential nominee, and of course he used to have a mountain named after him, Mount McKinley in Alaska, but they changed it recently to Mount Denali. And William McKinley was also one of the unfortunate presidents to suffer an assassination. William Jennings Bryan. Again, here's that term, populist, going for the farmer, for the laborer. He was a Democratic presidential nominee. He argued for the bimetallic standard, and in fact, he was so into the bimetallic standard, he wrote this famous speech called the Cross of Gold speech, and it was an attack on just using the gold standard. And he ends it up so dramatically, saying, "Will man crucify themselves upon a cross of gold?" Meaning that if we do adopt this gold standard, it's going to be disastrous for everybody. And some people say we would have been a lot better off had we had the gold and sorry, had we had the bimetallic standard, and others say no, this was gold standard was the way to go. I suppose we'll never know. All right, that is it for today. Thank you so much.